3:15 a.m., June 22, 1941. The Bug River, near Brest-Litovsk, Western Soviet Union. The sky is black, but the horizon suddenly pulses white. For a heartbeat there's silence. Then the world erupts. A sheet of German artillery fire slams into the far bank, turning tree lines into fountains of dirt and flame. The air reeks of cordite and damp earth. Shock waves roll across the water, flattening reeds, rattling helmets. On the Soviet side, a sentry in a dusty M35 helmet jerks awake inside his wooden guard post, the coffee tin on his stove toppling with the first blast. He thinks it's an ammunition dump exploding, until a second, closer barrage smashes the border fort behind him, showering him in splinters and brick dust. Searchlights snap on, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness. In their beams, you see them, gray figures low and fast, slipping down to the river with rubber boats. Engineers of the Wehrmacht, assault detachments with MG-34S slung over their shoulders, pioneers carrying Bangalore torpedoes like spears. Across the water, the fortress of Brest answers with a single defiant roar, heavy guns firing blind into the dark. The largest invasion force in human history is already moving forward, and almost no one on this front line understands what has begun. Hours later, far to the west in the Wolfschanz, Hitler's Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, the map room glows with lamplight and cigarette smoke. Broken red grease pencil lines mark the Soviet frontier. Over them, 3 great blue arrows plunge east. Here's Grupp Nord, Mit, Sud, Army Groups North, Center, South. Staff officers in field gray tunics stand in a half circle as situation reports pour in by radio. Bridges captured intact. Soviet units surprised in their barracks. Luftwaffe bombing runs hammering airfields from Minsk to Kiev. Hitler leans over the table, one hand pressed onto the map as if pinning the entire east beneath his palm. His voice is soft, almost conversational. "You see? We only had to kick in the door," he murmurs to his generals, "and the whole rotten structure will collapse." Around him, heads nod. The Soviet Union, he has told them for months, is nothing but a peasant rabble with tanks, a Bolshevik colossus with feet of clay. Its army, in his mind, is a joke, badly led, barely equipped, politically unreliable. A peasant army. On paper, at this moment, it's hard to argue. If you're a German grenadier in those first days, the east feels like a triumphal road. Your infantry column trudges behind panzers, kicking up white dust, past burning villages and abandoned Soviet positions. Captured Red Army soldiers march the other way. Gaunt, stunned, hands up, a jumble of uniforms and civilian boots. Some have no rifles, only bedrolls and half-pack kit bags. Many look more like farmhands and soldiers. Above you, Ju-87 Stukas scream over the treetops, their sirens wailing as they dive on retreating Soviet convoys. Columns of black smoke mark where they hit. Fuel depots, rail yards, artillery parks. Word spreads that entire Soviet air regiments were caught on the ground. Rows of I-16S and SB bombers burned out on their runways. Division briefings repeat the same message. The enemy is collapsing. The campaign will be short. Your officers talk openly about reaching Moscow before the autumn rains. Below the frontier, something doesn't fit the picture on Hitler's map. In the shattered ruins of Brest Fortress, surrounded on all sides, isolated Soviet defenders refuse to surrender. Days after German infantry have pushed far past the city, machine gun nests and cellars still spit fire. On broken walls, soldiers of the Red Army scratch messages in charcoal and blood. "I am dying, but I will not surrender. Farewell, motherland." Outside Minsk, advanced elements of Army Group Center run into KV-1 and KV-2 heavy tanks, monsters of steel that shrug off 37mm anti-tank rounds like pebbles. German officers order their guns to fire at point-blank range, shells sparking off thick armor. It takes 88mm flat guns dragged forward into direct fire, or sappers creeping close with explosives, to bring one down. The Soviets fall back, but they do not vanish. Armies are encircled, annihilated, and then, days later, new formations appear behind them, still fighting, still retreating in roughly the right direction, always deeper into the continent. Behind the German spearheads, Einsatzgruppen grew up and move in the shadows of the advance, following orders of a different kind. Mass shootings, political cleansings, the first steps of a war of annihilation Hitler has promised against Judeo-Bolshevism. This is not just conquest. It is ideological murder. The war in the East is already becoming something darker than blitzkrieg. By August, the heat presses down on endless fields of wheat and sunflowers. Dust chokes the roads. Engines overheat. Horses collapse in their traces. German motorized columns stretch for kilometers, stall for lack of fuel and spare parts. Yet the blue arrows keep moving forward on Hitler's map. Smolensk falls, then Kiev, in vast encirclement battles that entire Soviet armies. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners in a single operation. Hitler points to them as proof of his vision. How can such a state survive? But in Moscow, beneath the chandeliered ceilings of the Kremlin, another reality is taking shape. Stalin, who vanished from public view in the shock of the invasion's first days, now reemerges. Industrial combines from Kharkov, Leningrad, and the Donbass are being torn apart, loaded onto trains and shipped east of the Urals to Siberia, beyond the reach of the Luftwaffe. New rifle divisions are being raised in the Volga cities and the Urals, in distant Siberian garrisons. And in September, on a piece of paper signed with a trembling pen, Stalin issues Order Number 227. No step back. The peasant army is being ordered to hold or die where it stands. October brings rain, and the roads of Russia liquefy. If you were sitting in the cab of a German truck now, you'd feel it in your bones. The vehicle bogs down axle-deep in mud, wheels spinning, horses straining. Tanks sink into fields that look dry from a distance. Supply columns trail out, immobilized in quagmires. And beyond the mud, the first cold nights arrive. Ahead lies Moscow, close enough that some commanders boast they can see its glow reflected in the clouds. Behind, the casualty lists grow, and the men in the ranks are thinner, more exhausted, their greatcoats patched. Still at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler insists the final push will do it. One last eve, one last kick at the rotten structure. What he does not yet know is that, just beyond the edge of his maps, fresh Soviet divisions from Siberia are already on the move. Silent trains rolling west toward the snow and the front. In a few weeks, for the first time, it will not be the Germans who attack. The first snow comes quietly. By late November 1941, the fields outside Moscow are white. The birch trees rime with ice. The air so cold your breath feels like glass in your lungs. German sentries of army group centers stamp their feet in torn boots, wrapped in scavenged blankets and women's shawls. Their regulation greatcoats no match for 30 degrees below zero. Their fuel congeals in drums. Rifle bolts stick. Machine guns seize. The grease in their Panzer III turrets is as hard as wax. They had been told the campaign would end before winter. Winter, it seems, never got the order. Across the snow, shapes glide to the trees. Ghosts in white camouflage, quilted Telegrika jackets, fur-lined hats with ear flaps tied down. Siberian riflemen, pulled from distant garrisons on the Amur and the Mongolian steppe. Men who have spent their lives in this kind of cold, now crouch in shallow firing pits, fingers steady on the triggers of Mosin-Nagant rifles. They are the first answer to Hitler's laughter. Inside Moscow, the streets are dark, blackout curtains drawn tight. Air raid sirens still howl at night, but people have stopped flinching. Anti-tank ditches scar the outskirts. Tram lines vanish into fresh snow. On Red Square, through freezing fog, loudspeakers crackle with a name that will matter more and more. Georgy Zhukov, summoned from the defense of Leningrad and given command of the Western Front. Zhukov has spent the autumn months building a shield in front of Moscow. Layer after layer of trenches, anti-tank gun lines, fallback positions. Now, with the temperature plunging in German spearheads within artillery range of the capital, he is ready to do something the Wehrmacht has not yet faced on this front. Hit back. At 3 a.m. on December 5th, 1941, the horizon beyond the German positions flickers, just as it did on the Bug River months before. This time, it is Soviet artillery. Katyusha rocket launchers scream their war song, trails of fire arcing across the sky, slamming into frozen German bivouacs. Siberian ski battalions slide forward under cover of the barrage. T-34S and KV-1S grind through drifts of German tanks can barely enter, wide tracks biting into snow and ice. Their diesel engines cough clouds of black smoke in the frigid air. For the first time since the invasion began, thousands of German officers and NCOs hear a word they were never trained to expect on the Eastern Front: Zurückziehen. Pull back. The retreat from Moscow is not an orderly step back on a map. It is a near route in slow motion. Panzer crews sleep in frozen turrets, only to wake with frostbitten hands that cannot grip the levers. Horses, still the backbone of German logistics, drop dead in their harnesses, eyes glazed, ribs showing through matted winter coats. Guns are abandoned because there are no animals left to pull them. Soviet infantry in padded jackets chase them through the snow, sometimes as little as 50 meters behind, firing from the hip, hurling grenades into half-dug German foxholes and overturned trucks. Partisan bands, encouraged by the Soviet counteroffensive, strike at convoys in the rear, blowing up bridges and rail lines, vanishing back into the forests. In the Wolf's Lair, Hitler rages. He sacks the commander of Army Group Center, Fedor von Bock, then others in quick succession. Field marshals who suggest operational withdrawals are dismissed or sidelined. The man who had promised to kick in a rotten door now issues his own uncompromising directive. No more retreats. Stand fast. Hold where you are or die. For the men at the front, it turns miles of snow into a graveyard. Across the lines, Red Army soldiers are paying their own monstrous price. They attack with scarcely any artillery preparation, sometimes with no winter boots, their feet wrapped in rags. NKVD blocking detachments stand behind frontline units, tasked with shooting stragglers and deserters. Rumors spread of entire companies march into battle without rifles, told to pick up weapons from the fallen. They are not the professional, polished army the Wehrmacht has drilled against for years. They are farmers and students, miners from the Donbass, Kazakh horsemen, Siberian hunters. Many have never seen a city like Moscow, never ridden a train until the one that brought them here. But for the first time, in the snow before the Soviet capital, they see the Wehrmacht yield ground. It is a revelation. Spring 1942 comes with dirty snow melt and the sick sweet stink of thawing corpses. The front stabilizes in a jagged line, hundreds of kilometers short of Moscow. Both sides dig in, both exhausted, both already changed. On the Soviet side, factories evacuated to the Urals and Siberia are now spitting out tanks and guns at a staggering rate. On the German side, replacement battalions arrive that are younger, less trained, and more thinly spread. The Luftwaffe still owns the sky in many sectors, but not as effortlessly as before. Stalin, tasting the first hint of survival, misjudges. He orders ambitious offensives at Rzhev, at Kharkov. The peasant army hurls itself forward and is cut down by German firepower and operational skill. At Kharkov in May 1942, entire Soviet armies are encircled, tens of thousands taken prisoner. The Red Army is still learning how to fight this war. In June, Hitler outlines his own plan for the year. Not a renewed drive on Moscow, but a thrust south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus and a city on the Volga with a name that needles him personally: Stalingrad. On the map in the Wolf's Lair, it is just a word beside a bend in a blue river, a convenient objective along the route to the oil he craves. Take it, he believes, and the Soviets will be split, their lifeline on the Volga cut. They will broken at last. In Moscow, on July 28, 1942, Stalin signs Order Number 227, and Aishaga Nazid, not one step back. 4 Red Army soldiers. Retreat is no longer only dangerous. It is now a crime. Penal battalions are formed. Blocking detachments are formalized. The state will drive this army forward, if necessary, with a pistol at its own back. As the summer offensive, Case Blue, rolls across the southern steppe, grain fields burning under tank tracks, Luftwaffe bombers howling over the Don, a battered but hardening Soviet army retreats toward the Volga, step by bloody step. At the end of that road lies a city of factories and grain elevators, already cloaked in smoke and dust, already digging trenches in its streets. Stalingrad is waiting, and in its shattered ruins, the Peasant Army, is about to do something no one in Berlin thinks it can. By late August 1942, Stalingrad is already burning. Luftwaffe of the Luftwaffe, He-111s, Ju-88s, Stuka screaming in near-vertical dives, have smashed the city in wave after wave. Warehouses on the Volga appear collapse in sheets of flame. Entire apartment blocks are gutted, leaving only blackened shells and skeletal balconies twisted against the sky. Smoke blankets the river. The Volga itself seems on fire. On the West Bank, the Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus pushes steadily forward. Infantry in field gray step through streets buried in rubble, preceded by Stu-G-3 assault guns that fire into any building that looks alive. German officers peer through binoculars and see only broken masonry and dust. They believe the city is dying. They do not yet understand that it is being reborn as a fortress. Across the river, on the east bank, the situation seems hopeless. Boatloads of wounded are ferried away under constant air attack. NKVD detachments and staff officers try to impose order on the chaos at the crossings. Shells whistle in, sending geysers of water and steel into the air. Every jetty is splintered, every barge scarred with shrapnel. But new units are also arriving. 62nd Army, under the stocky, chain-smoking General Vasily Chikov, begins to cross in the other direction. Men hunch in the bottoms of flat-bottomed boats, water sloshing over their boots. Heads ducked as machine gun tracers rake the river. They land on the west bank amid wreckage, running from pier to crater, stumbling past burning oil tanks to reach the ruins. Some never make it. Their bodies drift downstream, caught in eddies. Faces turn to the gray sky. Still more come. Once inside the ruined city, the war changes shape. It is no longer the sweeping maneuver warfare the Wehrmacht has perfected. Here, every building is a bunker, every cellar a fighting position, every pile of bricks a potential ambush. Red Army soldiers hack firing slits into factory walls, mine stairwells, string tripwires and shatter hallways. Snipers nest in chimney stacks, on cranes, deep inside collapsed apartment blocks. Chukov calls it hugging the enemy. Get as close as possible, just meters away, so German artillery and Stuka bombers can't strike without hitting their own men. If you were a German grenadier now, you'd feel that hug like a chokehold. You fight for a ground floor in the morning, lose it in the afternoon, retake it in the evening. A single room can change hands half a dozen times in a day. You step over rubble and land on a stair with grenade under it. You fire at shadows in dustic air, your ears ringing, throat raw from smoke. Names emerge, small places that become legends. The Red October Factory, the Barricati Gun Works, the grain elevator that stands out on a flat plain like a lone island. Its defenders fighting surrounded until the last round is fired and the last bayonet charge is spent. Pavlov's house, a battered apartment block where a platoon led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov digs in and holds for weeks under constant assault, transforming the building into a fortress bristling with machine guns, anti-tank rifles, and pre-sighted fields of fire. The Peasant Army is learning urban warfare one corpse at a time. By October, 62nd Army is clinging to a strip of rubble no more than a few hundred meters deep along the Volga. German maps show Soviet positions in red slivers pressed against the river. Reports go back to Army Group South. The city is almost taken. Just a little more pressure, a little more blood, and it will fall. Hitler insists Stalingrad must be taken at any cost. He does not see what his obsession is doing to his own army. Divisions that entered the city at near full strength are now down to a fraction of their men. Battalions are commanded by lieutenants because every senior officer is dead or wounded. Supplies come over dirt roads stretching back hundreds of kilometers, vulnerable to the first winter snows. And on the steppe beyond the city, north and south of that shattered skyline, fresh Soviet armies are massing. They don't look like much at first glance. Half-trained conscripts. T-34s clattering off rail cars. Artillery batteries nose to tail along muddy tracks. Cavalry corps on tough, underfed horses. But behind them are Stavka planners, Vasilevsky, Zhukov, studying German dispositions like surgeons examining an X-ray. They see something Paulus does not. The flanks of 6th Army are held not by the best of the Wehrmacht, but by Allied armies, Romanians, Italians, Hungarians, stretched in over the open steppe, poorly equipped to face tanks, freezing in their foxholes. A plan takes shape. Code name, Operation Uranus. On November 19, 1942, the steppe erupts. Soviet artillery from the Don to the Kalmyk steppe roars to life, a storm of fire hammering the Romanian lines north and south of Stalingrad. T-34S, their tracks clanking, bursts of the morning mist in wedges, infantry clinging to their hulls, scarves snapping in the freezing wind. Romanian anti-tank guns spit, but their shells bounce off sloped armor. Positions collapse. Units panic and fall back. Some fight bravely and are crushed, their guns firing until overrun. Within days, the northern and southern pincers of Uranus meet at Kalikundan. The ring slams shut. Inside the frozen cauldron, 6th Army, nearly 300,000 men, Germans and attached units, encircled in and around Stalingrad. Paulus radios for permission to break out westward, to smash a corridor to the German lines. Hitler's reply is absolute. 6th Army will stand fast. It will be supplied by air. Luftwaffe officers in their own headquarters blanch at the numbers. The tonnage required to keep 6th Army alive is far beyond what their surviving transports can deliver in Russian winter conditions. But the order stands. Junkers Ju-52s and U-111s begin flying into blizzards, landing on improvised strips under artillery fire. Taking off again heavy with wounded, they are shot down in droves. Rations are cut. Ammunition dwindles. Horses are slaughtered for meat. Frostbite, dysentery. Starvation stalked the trenches and cellars of the Kessel, the cauldron. Outside the ring, fresh Soviet armies batter back a desperate German relief attempt. Operation Winter Storm, and hold their encirclement tight. In January 1943, under a leaden sky over a city of rubble and frozen corpses, the last remnants of the 6th Army surrender. Paulus, promoted to Field Marshal the day before, Hitler's way of telling to die rather than be taken, lays down his arms alive. The invincible Wehrmacht has lost an entire field army. In the Kremlin, Stalin allows himself the smallest of smiles. In the Wolf's Lair, Hitler rages and speaks of betrayal of cowardice, anything but his own error. Across the Eastern Front, one fact is now undeniable. The Red Army did not collapse. It bled, learned, and struck back. But even after Stalingrad, Hitler believes he can wrest the initiative back with one more decisive attack, one armored thrust that will shatter this peasant army before it fully matures. On a map, that place looks like a bulge in the front north of Kharkov, around a city called Kursk. There, in the summer of 1943, steel will meet steel on a scale the world has never seen. 2:20 a.m., July 5th, 1943. Near Panairai, northern face of the Kursk salient. The night sky flickers green and white as German illumination rounds burst overhead, turning the wheat fields into a ghostly sea. For a few seconds, you can see everything. Rows of dark earthworks, coils of barbed wire, black mouths of anti-tank, guns yawning from camouflage pits. Then the horizon explodes. German artillery, hundreds of guns, opens up in a rolling barrage, the air shredding with shrapnel. Earth showers down on Soviet infantrymen huddled in trenches barely deeper than their own height. Telephone wires snap. The ground shakes as if some buried beast is trying to claw its way out. In one dugout, a young Red Army lieutenant grips the edge of the table, lamp swinging above his head, maps pinned under a mug. His division sector lies directly in the path of 9th Army, one of the two great German claws of Operation Citadel. He knows what's coming next. Panzers. Citadel is Hitler's last great gamble in the East. For months he has delayed, waiting for his new weapons, Panthers, Tigers, elephant tank destroyers, to arrive. Around the protruding bulge of Soviet-held territory at Kursk, the finest panzer divisions still left on the Eastern Front have massed. On paper, the plan looks like the old days. 2 armored pincers from north and south, meeting behind the salient, encircling and destroying entire Soviet armies. In the map room, Hitler's finger traces the arc of encirclement. If this works, he tells his generals, the Red Army will bleed itself white. The front will stabilize, perhaps even a negotiated peace. But the enemy is no longer a mystery. Stavka, reading German intentions through intercepted signals and frontline reports, has known since spring where the blow will fall. Instead of recoiling, they have turned the Kursk bulge into a labyrinth of death. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, old men, women, teenagers, have dug anti-tank ditches and trenches, laid millions of mines in great belts that stretch for kilometers. Engineers have sighted pack fronts, concentrations of anti-tank guns, like hidden teeth in the earth. Behind the first lines lie second and third, then mobile tank reserves waiting in the tree lines. The peasant army has become an engineer's nightmare. Dawn comes gray and hot. German panzers roll forward under a low, dirty sky, their flanks bristling with infantry, their bows cutting tracks through wheat heavy with dust. Tigers advance at the point, their thick armor shrugging off the first anti-tank shells that slam into them. Then they hit the minefields. Explosions lift tanks off their tracks, flip half-tracks into the air. Engineers crawl forward on their bellies under machine gun fire, probing with bayonets, trying to clear lanes. Anti-tank guns open up from concealed positions. T-34S, hull down, appear briefly on ridge lines, fire, and back away before the German gunners can lay their sights. On the southern face of the salient, near Prokhorovka, the battle reaches a crescendo. July 12, 1943. Dust and smoke turn noon into twilight. T-34S of the 5th Guards Tank Army charge headlong across rolling ground, closing the distance before German Tiger crews can fully exploit their superior range. The clash becomes a knife fight of steel at point-blank range. Tanks colliding, ramming, tracks climbing over hulls, gun barrels bent and twisted like broken fingers. From the air, a German pilot looking down sees nothing but a seething mass of black dots and flashes of flame. Machines lock together in a churning melee. No clean breakthrough comes. Citadel bleeds itself out against the Soviet defenses. The casualties and losses in armor are staggering, on both sides, but the Germans cannot force their way through those layered belts of guns and mines. Then news arrives from the west. The Allies have landed in Sicily. Hitler, terrified of a collapse in the Mediterranean, orders Citadel halted. For the first time, a major German offensive in the east has failed to achieve its goals. The elite panzer divisions, even if not annihilated, are mauled, their experienced crews irreplaceable. The Wehrmacht striking arm has been bluntly, permanently damaged. The initiative shifts, and this time, the Red Army does not give it back. What follows in late 1943 is less a series of battles and more a season of falling dominoes. Soviet offensives roll westward, Orel, Kharkov, Smolensk. Tank armies and shock formations punch through weakened German lines, infantry pouring into the gaps. The Dnieper, once a distant blue line on maps, rises in front of them as a real, violent obstacle, wide, fast, hostile. Red Army soldiers cross it in anything that floats. Rafts made of oil drums, doors lashed together, boats riddled with shrapnel. German artillery shells the far bank, shredding reed beds, tearing apart pontoons. Men drown inches from safety, dragged down by soaked greatcoats and ammunition belts. But bridgeheads take root. On those muddy strips of land, under constant fire, engineers throw up pontoon bridges in days and nights that blur together, the riverbank choked with wrecked vehicles and bodies. Soon T-34S are grinding onto the western bank, water pouring off their hulls. Kiev is retaken. The Soviets stand again on ground they had lost in 1941, but now with an army very different from the stunned formations that first reeled back before Barbarossa. Summer 1944 brings a cruel symmetry. June 22nd, 1944. 3 years to the day since the German invasion began. Soviet guns open up across Belarus in a barrage so intense that entire German strong points simply vanish under the storm. Operation Barbarossa. For Soviet fronts, hundreds of divisions, thousands of tanks and guns, slam into Army Group Center. The German defenses, thin and undermanned, crack wide open. Soviet tank corps surge through, bypassing pockets of resistance, severing roads and railways, collapsing the front into isolated islands of troops. German corps and divisions disappear from the order of battle in days. Commanders report chaos. Units overrun, headquarters cut off, airfields captured with aircraft still on the ground. Minsk falls. Thousands of German prisoners shamble eastward, a river of gray uniforms flowing in the opposite direction to the tide of 1941. In Hitler's headquarters, maps are rearranged so the gaping hole in the center of the Eastern Front does not look quite so catastrophic. Euphemisms, front readjustment, shortening of lines, mask the fact that an entire army group has been shattered. For Soviet soldiers advancing through Belarus, the cost of that victory lies in what they see along the roads. Villages burned to foundations, mass graves unearthed, the skeletal survivors of ghettos and camps stumbling toward them. The war of annihilation Hitler unleashed has left its scars on the land. Now the Red Army carries that memory with it as it crosses into Poland, into the Baltic states, onto German soil itself. By January 1945, Soviet spearheads reached the Vistula and then the Oder. Tank armies burst out from bridgeheads in the Vistula-Oder offensive, covering hundreds of kilometers in weeks, racing through snow and mud, bypassing pockets of resistance, appearing on the Oder's western bank just 70 kilometers from Berlin. German civilians flee in columns. Carts pile with furniture, children clutching dolls, old men in faded uniforms from another war. Volkssturm units drill with Panzerfaust in city streets under the gaze of crumbling statues. In bunkers under the Reich Chancellery, Hitler speaks of miracle weapons and phantom armies that exist only on situation maps. On a frigid night along the Oder, a Soviet sergeant stands in a slit trench, wind knifing through his padded jacket, watching the faint glow on the western horizon. Berlin. For years ago, his comrades died in front of Minsk, Kiev, Smolensk, chased by an enemy that laughed at them. Tonight, he can almost taste the end. But between him and the Reich's capital lie rivers, fortified lines, and a city prepared to fight street by street, cellar by cellar. The peasant army has come a long way. To finish the journey, it will have to walk through fire one last time. 3 a.m., April 16th, 1945. Seelow Heights, east of Berlin. The night turns to day in a single, blinding heartbeat. Over 9,000 Soviet guns, mortars, and Katyusha launchers open fire at once, lining the Oder front in an almost unbroken wall of flame. The roar is physical. It crushes the air from your lungs, beats on your chest like a fist. Hills vanish in fountains of earth. German positions on the Seelow escarpment flicker, then disappear in rolling waves of explosions. For 40 minutes, the barrage never slackens. Red Army infantry in padded jackets crouch in waterlogged foxholes, helmets rattling with each concussion. Faces are smeared with mud and charcoal, eyes fixed on the smoky horizon. Behind them, T-34/85S and IS-2 heavy tanks idle, exhaust pluming in the cold pre-dawn air, drivers gripping their levers. When the guns finally lift, there is a moment of impossible silence. Then the whistles blow. They climb out of their trenches and move forward into the last line before Berlin. The Seelow Heights are not just another objective. They are the final shield of the Reich's capital. High ground bristling with 88mm guns, machine nests, bunkers carved into the clay. The men defending them are a grim mix. Hard-bitten veterans of the Eastern Front, Luftwaffe ground crews turned infantry, Hitler youth with Panzerfaust too big for their thin shoulders. Zhukov's first Belarusian front slams into them head-on. The first Soviet waves stumble almost blindly. The massive artillery barrage has churned the Oder floodplain into a swamp of craters and mud. Floodlights flicker on from behind the Soviet lines, try to silhouette German positions, but the glare also blinds their own infantry, silhouettes them against the mist. German machine guns sigh through the advancing lines. Tanks bog down, tracks spinning, engines screaming. Assault gun crews fire from slit trenches blasted into the slopes, shells punching gaping holes in the advancing armor. Casualty reports pile up in Zhukov's field headquarters like snowdrifts. He grits his teeth, knowing that every minute of delay here is another day for Hitler to fortify Berlin, another day of dying in a city already beyond saving. He orders more units in. Guards divisions, tank corps, artillery in direct fire. The Red Army grinds forward, not in a triumphant rush, but in a slow, relentless shove of flesh and steel. 3 days later, the Seelow Heights crack. And beyond them, at last, lies the flat, scarred approach to Berlin. By April 21st, the first Soviet shells fall on the capital. They come in with a long, rising scream, then detonate somewhere in the sprawl of stone and ash that was once one of Europe's great cities. Fire engines howl uselessly. Rubble blocks tram lines. Civilians carry buckets of water in human chains, even as more shells arrive. In the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, the ceiling dusts itself onto maps and uniforms with each distant impact. Generals trace the encroaching arcs of First Belarusian and First Ukrainian fronts. Red arrows, inked in haste, are already curling around Berlin like claws. Hitler's hands shake as he jabs at the maps. He speaks of armies that no longer exist. Wenck from the west, Steiner from the north. Phantom forces at will in his imagination smash the Soviet ring and restore the front. Outside, young Volkssturm units in mismatched uniforms, old men in First World War medals beside boys barely old enough to shave, dig foxholes in city parks. They practice with Panzerfaust in the shadow of half-collapsed apartment blocks. SS officers bark orders. Party functionaries push them toward the front with speeches about honor and sacrifice. The Red Army is no longer a distant menace. You can hear it now, dull rumbles, the chop of Katyusha salvos, coming closer every hour. Street fighting in Berlin is a brutal echo of Stalingrad, but this time the roles are reversed. Soviet storm groups, hardened in 100 ruined cities, move block by block. Engineers blow holes through walls to avoid exposed intersections. Submachine gunners with PPSH-41S clear rooms in bursts of fire, grenades bouncing off broken tiles, plaster dust hanging in the air like fog. IS-2S nose down narrow streets, their 122mm guns firing point-blank into resistance nests. Brick and bone vanish in the same cloud of pulverized stone. German resistance fractures along lines of desperation and fanaticism. Some Wehrmacht units fight hard and then melt away. Some SS detachments defend to the last cartridge. Their positions pile with their own dead. Civilians cower in basements, clutching white sheets they dare not wave. On April 25th, Soviet spearheads meet west of the city, linking up north of Potsdam. Berlin is encircled. In the bunker, radio reports close in like a noose. Towns that were holding yesterday are lost today, overrun tonight. Hitler rants, then sinks into silence. Eva Braun lights another cigarette. Goebbels dictates proclamations that no longer have a state to govern. Above them, the city is being gutted floor by floor. The last act focuses on a symbol, a battered neoclassical building scarred by years of war. The Reichstag. Its dome has been shattered by bombs. Its columns are chipped and blackened. But to Stalin, it is more than a ruin. It is the heart of the regime that invaded his country. He wants a red flag over this building, and he wants the world to see it. April 30th, 1945. As assault groups of the 3rd Shock Army and 8th Guards Army close in on the government quarter, Hitler sits on a worn sofa in the Führer bunker, the muffled thunder of artillery shaking dust from the lights. Above ground, Soviet soldiers fight their way through the government district, past the flak tower at the zoo, across the Malka Bridge under sheets of machine gun fire. Bodies clog the railings. T-34S burn on the approaches, their crews slumped half out of hatches, uniforms smoldering. Storm groups reach the Reichstag steps under a wet, gray sky. The building is defended by die-hard remnants, SS, sailors from the Kriegsmarine, police units. Every floor becomes a battlefield. Corridors vanish in smoke and broken glass. Stairwells are swept by machine gun fire from landings above. It is not a clean cinematic advance, but a crawling, room-to-room struggle. Men die for meters. As evening falls, small groups of Soviet soldiers grope their way up and to shell the building, through choking dust and darkness. In the bunker, not far away, a single dull report echoes through the concrete corridors. Hitler is dead. His body is carried up to the Chancellery Garden, doused in petrol, and burned in a shallow crater, while Soviet shells stitch the ground not far away. On the Reichstag shattered roof, amid twisted metal and the stumps of statues, Two soldiers from the 150th Rifle Division drag a makeshift banner into place. It is just cloth, one more red flag among thousands that have flown over depots, trenches, and parade grounds. But when they lash it to the stone and it snaps in the cold night wind, it speaks to something larger. It is 2:25 a.m., May 1st, 1945. For years earlier, the men in that army had been dismissed as peasants, rabble, a rotten structure that would collapse with one well-aimed kick. Now their flag flies over the ruins of the Reich's parliament. In the days to come, Berlin will surrender. The guns on the Eastern Front will fall silent. Europe will stagger into a haunted peace. Tens of millions are dead. Cities are ash. The peasant army that reached Berlin is no longer the same force that reeled back from the Bug River. It has been forged in fire, hardened by loss, and driven by a grim, consuming purpose. History will argue over its methods, its crimes, and its heroism, the shadow it casts in the decades that follow. But one image is beyond argument: a red banner, snapping above a broken city, proof that contempt can be a deadly kind of blindness, and that the army mocked as a joke became the hammer that shattered Hitler's world.